So I want you to imagine two totally different companies. Okay.
Okay, I'm picturing them.
Right. So company A it's a household name. Like it generates nearly $200 billion a year in revenue.
That's massive.
Yeah, massive. It employs hundreds of thousands of people. It operates these massive fleets of incredibly complex machinery. And honestly, it provides a service that almost every single person listening to this right now has used at some point.
Right.
But then you've got company B, and company B makes like a fraction of that revenue.
Okay.
It offers a product that is completely free to you, the consumer. It has zero physical storefronts, no manufacturing plants, and basically no physical footprint outside of, some servers.
Right, just some data center somewhere.
Exactly. But here's the catch. Company A makes almost zero profit. I mean, they're constantly teetering on the edge of bankruptcy, fighting for their life every single day.
Wow.
Yeah. And Company B, they just print tens of billions of dollars in pure unadulterated profit year after year.
Which is just wild.
It is. And why is that? It's because Company A is a commercial airline operating in perfect competition, and Company B is Google, operating as a functional monopoly.
Yeah.
So today, we're figuring out how you build Company B.
Yeah.
We're figuring out how to build the monopoly.
It really is the ultimate question in business.
Mm-hmm.
And that contrast you just set up, it strikes at the absolute heart of what we are analyzing today in this deep dive.
It really does.
Because when most people imagine building a successful tech company, they have this very specific, highly romanticized path in their head.
Oh, totally. Like the 22-year-old coding in a dorm room.
Exactly. They picture the dorm room launching a consumer app that just goes viral overnight, throwing these lavish launch parties, and then boom, becoming a billionaire.
Yeah, it feels like setting up this trendy pop-up shop or something.
Right. It's flashy, it's highly visible, and it's very dependent on catching the cultural zeitgeist.
Yep.
But that is the consumer space. If you want to understand real, enduring, structural power, like the kind of power that literally shapes the global economy, you have to look past the buzzwords.
You really do.
You have to look past the apps sitting on your iPhone home screen. You have to look at the enterprise.
The enterprise. I mean, it sounds so like corporate and dry, right?
It does sound a bit dry, yeah.
Yeah. But building for the enterprise is not about setting up a trendy pop-up shop. It's actually like laying down the municipal water supply for an entire city.
That is a perfect way to look at it.
Right. Because it's invisible to the average person walking down the street, but if it stops working for even 5 minutes, society basically collapses.
Completely.
And today, our mission for you, the listener, is to decode the blueprint for becoming that water supply. We're diving into this legendary stack of startup lectures featuring some of the most, formidable architects in the technology sector.
Yeah, this stack is incredible.
It really is. We are extracting the operating manuals from founders and investors who have built multi-billion-dollar empires.
And what makes this specific collection of sources so vital is that these individuals, they aren't academic theorists,
Right. They actually did it.
Exactly. They are the practitioners who laid the pipes. They figured out the structural forces, the power dynamics, and the true global significance of enterprise software.
Yeah.
And to really grasp the blueprint they're offering, we first have to undergo the exact same paradigm shift that the founder of Box went through in the mid-2000s.
Right. Aaron Levy.
Right. We have to realize why the consumer space is actually a trap and why the enterprise is the ultimate arena.
So let's start right there with his realization, because he tells this incredible story about the early days of building Box, which, is now a massive cloud content management company.
Huge company.
Yeah. But in the beginning, they were looking at the landscape and trying to decide their trajectory. And he openly admits that the consumer side of software looked incredibly fun.
I mean, it was the era of Web 2.0.
Exactly. Consumer startups were getting all the press. They had those massive user growth charts going up and to the right. And honestly, they were throwing the best parties.
They definitely were.
But he identified a fatal flaw in the consumer model, and that flaw was monetization.
Right, because the fundamental economic reality of the consumer market is just brutal.
Oh, it really is.
When you build for the consumer, your primary adversary is the user's inherent desire to conserve their own personal limited funds.
Right. They don't want to spend their own money.
No, they don't. So you are fighting this bloody war of attrition just to convince an individual to part with, like $3 a month.
Yeah.
And the landscape is rigged against you because you are competing against behemoths like Google or Meta who are perfectly willing to engineer the exact same product you just spent a year building and then give it away to the consumer for absolutely free.
Right, and let me stop you there, because why would they give it away for free? Like, just to kill the startup?
Well, not necessarily out of malice, but because their business models are predicated on capturing data and locking users into an ecosystem.
Ah, okay.
To a giant advertising-based company, the software itself is just a loss leader to get your attention.
Wow, yeah.
So as a startup trying to charge $3 for a calendar app or, a storage tool, your margin is instantly crushed to zero by a competitor who treats your core product as just a free feature.
That is so tough.
He realized this was a game he simply could not win.
So he pivots his gaze to the enterprise. But at the time, and this is crucial context for you listening, enterprise software was considered the most unsexy, boring sector imaginable.
Oh, completely.
It was incredibly slow. The user interfaces looked like, I don't know, gray spreadsheets from 1995.
They were terrible.
They were. And the sales cycle was agonizing. He makes this hilarious joke in his lecture about the reality of enterprise sales back then. He says you had to hire a guy named Chuck with a briefcase.
Yes, Chuck.
Yeah. Chuck's entire job was to fly across the country, go to a corporate office, take the chief information officer out to a steak dinner, play a round of golf, and maybe, just maybe, after an 18-month sales cycle, get a single multi-year contract signed.
It was a grueling process.
Really grueling.
But he looked past Chuck with a briefcase, and he looked at the underlying math. And the math was staggering.
Right.
At the time of this realization, the entire global consumer e-commerce market was roughly $170 billion.
Which, I mean, that sounds like a lot of money.
It does. But global enterprise IT spending,
Yeah.
the amount of money companies were paying to run their internal operations,
Yeah.
that was a $3.7 trillion market.
Wow.
That is trillion with a T spent every single year.
It's basically an ocean of capital compared to a bottle.
Exactly.
But it isn't just the sheer size of the market that matters. It's the psychology of the buyer, right? I mean, the enterprise buyer is not the consumer agonizing over a $3 monthly charge.
Precisely. The psychology of the enterprise buyer is completely inverted from the consumer.
How so?
Well, a consumer buys something to entertain themselves, or maybe save a tiny bit of time. But an enterprise customer buys software for one reason: to increase the performance and productivity of their workforce.
No, right.
The value equation is entirely different. A Fortune 500 company will look at a piece of software and do a very simple calculation.
What's the calculus?
They'll say, okay, we have 10,000 employees. If your software can make our workforce just 5% more efficient by eliminating repetitive tasks, you have just generated hundreds of millions of dollars in value for us.
Wow, yeah.
And because that return on investment is undeniable, they will happily sign a $10 million check. They are not trying to conserve pennies. They are trying to buy leverage.
Okay, but if the enterprise market is so massive and the buyers are so wealthy, why was it ripe for disruption by 20-something founders?
That's the million-dollar question.
Right. He points out 3 macro-technological shifts that basically blew the doors off the enterprise fortress, allowing startups to storm the castle. And I really want to break these down because they are the foundation of everything that follows.
Yeah, let's do it.
So the first shift he mentions is the plummeting cost of storage and computing.
Right. To understand how critical this was, you have to think about the physical reality of building a software company in the late 90s or early 2000s.
It was so different back then.
Completely different. If you had an idea for a tech company, you couldn't just write code. You had to go out and raise millions of dollars in venture capital just to buy physical servers.
Oh, man, yeah.
You had to rent a warehouse, install these heavy server racks, pay for industrial air conditioning to keep them from melting, and literally hire a team of technicians just to keep the blinking lights on.
That is wild.
The capital expenditure required just to start a company was a massive barrier to entry. But Moore's Law, the exponential decrease in the cost of computing power, suddenly made storage and compute incredibly cheap. What was completely uneconomical for a startup 2 years prior suddenly became pocket change.
Which leads perfectly into the second massive shift, the transition from customized on-premise servers to standardized cloud platforms. We're talking about the birth of Amazon Web Services, AWS, and platforms like Salesforce.
This is the architectural revolution. Before the cloud, enterprise software was deployed on-premise.
Right. What did that actually look like?
It meant if a hospital bought database software from Oracle, Oracle literally shipped CDs and sent engineers to physically install the software onto the hospital's own private servers down in their basement.
Oh my gosh, CDs.
Yes, CDs. It was bespoke, highly customized, and required constant manual maintenance. But AWS changed the paradigm.
Right.
AWS allowed a startup to rent server space over the internet by the hour. It transformed computing from this massive upfront capital expense into a variable operating expense. You only paid for what you used.
That changes everything.
It really does.
Yeah.
And for the end user, the software didn't live in a basement anymore. It lived in a web browser. It could be updated instantly for millions of users at once.
And then the third shift, the one that completely changed the power dynamics of the entire global economy. He argues this was the most profound change of all. The rise of user-led adoption driven by mobile devices, specifically the iPhone phenomenon.
Yeah, we call this the consumerization of IT.
Okay.
Historically, the end user of enterprise software, the person actually typing on the keyboard, had absolutely no say in what software they used.
Just had to use whatever was there.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
The decision was made in a closed-door meeting between a slick enterprise salesperson, our friend Chuck with a briefcase, and a chief information officer who was prioritizing security and control over usability.
Right.
The CIO would mandate a terrible, clunky piece of software, and the employees just had to suffer through it.
But then the iPhone put a supercomputer in every single employee's pocket.
Yes. And more importantly, it introduced the App Store.
Ah.
Suddenly, an individual marketing manager who was frustrated with their clunky corporate file sharing system could just pull out their phone, go to the App Store, and download Box or Dropbox for free.
Wow. They completely bypassed the CIO.
Entirely. They started using the tool to do their job faster. Then they invited 3 colleagues to collaborate. Then an entire department was using it.
Right.
By the time the CIO even realized what was happening, the software was already deeply embedded in the company's daily operations.
That's brilliant.
The individual employee became a Trojan horse, smuggling the startup software past the corporate guards. The power to choose software shifted from the top of the hierarchy to the bottom.
Let me stop you right there, though, and play devil's advocate for a second.
Go for it.
Because this sounds like a very neat narrative, right? But if the enterprise market is a $3.7 trillion gold mine, and the cloud made it easier to build software, and the iPhone made it easier to distribute software, why did it take a new generation of college dropouts to build these tools?
Right, why didn't the big guys do it?
Exactly. Why didn't the incumbent giants, the Microsofts, the Oracles, the IBMs, just update their software to be cloud-based and user-friendly? I mean, they had billions in the bank and armies of the best engineers in the world. Why let Aaron Levy eat their lunch?
That is the multi-trillion-dollar question. And the answer is deeply rooted in a concept called the innovator's dilemma.
Okay.
The incumbent tech giants were not stupid, and they were certainly not lacking engineering talent. They were actually trapped by their own success. You have to look at their financial architecture.
What do you mean by that?
Well, companies like Oracle were making billions of dollars selling multi-year, multi-million-dollar customized contracts through massive top-down sales forces.
Right. They were making money hand over fist.
Exactly. So imagine you are the CEO of one of these giants. One of your engineers comes to you and says, hey, there's this new trend called the cloud. I think we should build a simpler version of our product, put it on the web, and give it away for free to individual employees, hoping they might upgrade to a $5 a month premium plan later.
Oh, I see where this is going.
Right. If you were the CEO, you look at that proposal and you literally throw the engineer out of the room.
Yeah, because it ruins everything.
Yes. Adopting that new freemium bottom-up model would completely cannibalize your existing business. If you offer a cheap, simple cloud version, your Fortune 500 clients are going to cancel their $10 million bespoke contracts.
Wow.
The legacy giants could not adopt the new paradigm without willingly destroying their own massive revenue streams. They were financially paralyzed. And that paralysis created a massive, undefended wedge for startups.
That makes total sense. They couldn't move because their existing profit margins were holding them hostage.
Precisely.
So the startups slip in through the wedge. They target the individual employee. But once you are inside that $3.7 trillion arena, the next logical question is, how do you survive?
Yeah, how do you not just die?
Right. How do you ensure you don't just become another forgotten tool? And the sources in our stack are incredibly, almost aggressively clear on this point. The strategy to survive in the enterprise is not to compete better than your rivals. The strategy is to stop competing entirely.
Yeah.
You have to build a monopoly.
And this is where we transition from the market identification phase to structural philosophy. One of our sources delivers a notoriously provocative thesis here. He states, flatly, competition is for losers.
Which is such a crazy thing to hear.
It is. It inherently rubs people the wrong way. I mean,
Yeah.
from the time we're in grade school, we're taught that competition is validating. We are taught that competition breeds excellence, that it is the backbone of capitalism.
Totally.
But he argues that we have a massive psychological blind spot. He argues that in business, competition is a destructive force that obliterates profits.
And he divides the entire business universe into a strict dichotomy, right?
Right.
There is no spectrum. On one end, you have perfect competition.
Right.
And on the other end, you have monopolies. And he uses this brilliant, brutal framework called the value equation to explain the difference. He says that every business is defined by two independent variables. The first variable is creating value. Let's call that X. You have to build something the world actually wants.
Right. Step one.
But the second variable is capturing value. Let's call that Y. Just because you create a massive amount of value doesn't mean you get to keep any of the money. You need both a huge X and a huge Y to be a truly successful empire.
And to illustrate this, he uses the exact comparison you opened the show with. He looks at the United States airline industry. In terms of creating value, the X variable, the airline industry is a modern miracle. It connects the globe. It enables international commerce. It allows families to see each other. The societal value is astronomical.
Oh, absolutely.
At the time of his lecture, he noted that domestic airline revenues were around $195 billion. So a massive X.
But what about the Y? What about capturing the value?
That is where the tragedy of perfect competition reveals itself. Because the airline industry is perfectly competitive, multiple airlines fly the exact same Boeing or Airbus planes to the exact same airports at roughly the exact same times.
Yeah, it's all the same.
From the consumer's perspective, a flight from New York to Chicago on Airline A is functionally identical to Airline B. So how do the airlines differentiate themselves?
Price.
Exactly. Price. They are trapped in a perpetual race to the bottom, constantly slashing ticket prices by $5 just to steal a passenger from arrival. The competition is so fierce that the profit margins are ground down to zero. The airlines capture almost no value. Zero Y.
Wow.
They create hundreds of billions in value, but constantly flirt with bankruptcy.
And then he pivots to Google. He points out that at the time of his lecture, Google was generating maybe $50 billion in revenue, so a significantly smaller X than the entire airline industry. They were creating less total economic movement.
Right.
But Google's profit margins were astronomically high. They were swimming in cash. A massive Y. Why? Because they are a functional monopoly in search. If you want to run a search ad, you do not have a dozen identical search engines to choose from. You go to Google.
Yeah.
Because they have no real competition, they don't have to slash their prices to survive. They set the price and they capture the value.
He references the Anna Karenina principle here, which is a really fascinating literary pivot.
How so?
Well, the famous opening line of Leo Tolstoy's novel is that all happy families are alike, but every unhappy family is unhappy in its own way. He flips this principle completely upside down for the business world.
Okay, I like this.
He says that in business, all happy companies are different. They are happy because they have uniquely solved a specific problem and escaped the gravity of competition to become a monopoly.
Right.
But all unhappy companies are exactly the same. They are unhappy because they failed to escape competition. They are trapped in a commodity market, grinding out a miserable existence.
Man, it makes me think of a crowded city block filled with like 50 identical restaurants.
Perfect example.
Right, like everyone is selling a cheeseburger. Every restaurant owner is standing on the sidewalk screaming at the customers, slashing the price of their burger by 50 cents, offering free fries, just doing whatever they can just to get someone to walk through their door.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, no one is making any money. The rent is eating their margins, and they are just barely surviving. That is perfect competition.
It's exhausting.
But a monopoly isn't a restaurant. A monopoly is owning the only bridge that connects the city to the island. You don't want to be the first mover opening a burger joint on a crowded block. You want to be the last mover building the bridge.
That is an excellent analogy.
Yeah.
Because if you own the bridge, everyone has to pay your toll.
Exactly.
But how do you actually engineer that bridge in the technology sector? He doesn't just leave it at abstract philosophy. He breaks down the structural architecture of a monopoly into 4 distinct characteristics. If you want to capture the enterprise market, your product must possess these 4 traits.
Okay, let's walk through them. First, proprietary technology.
Right. It cannot just be 20% better than the existing solution.
Why not?
Because if a new software is only slightly better, enterprise customers will not go through the massive headache of retraining their entire workforce to use it.
Oh, true. Training takes forever.
Exactly. He argues your proprietary technology must be an order of magnitude better, like 10 times better than the closest substitute. It has to be so vastly superior that it is functionally impossible for a customer to ignore. Think of the jump from a typewriter to a word processor. That is a 10x improvement.
Wow, yeah. The second characteristic is network effects. We hear this term thrown around a lot, but fundamentally it means the product becomes more valuable to the user as more people use it.
Exactly. A telephone is totally useless if you are the only person on Earth who owns one.
Right.
But if a million people own one, it becomes an indispensable tool.
Mm.
In the enterprise space, if your software allows for seamless collaboration, then every new employee who joins the platform makes the platform more powerful for the existing employees.
It just pulls everyone in.
It creates a gravitational pull that makes it incredibly painful for a company to switch to a competitor.
Third, economies of scale.
This is where software has an inherent, almost unfair advantage over physical businesses.
How so?
Well, if you run a bakery, every new loaf of bread you sell requires more flour, more yeast, more physical labor. Your costs rise with your sales.
Right.
But software has a marginal cost of zero. It costs millions of dollars to write the first copy of a software program, but it costs absolutely nothing to distribute the second copy or the millionth copy.
To the magic of code.
Yeah. As a software monopoly scales, its fixed costs remain relatively flat while its revenue explodes, leading to those massive profit margins we saw with Google.
And the fourth characteristic is brand. Building an identity that becomes synonymous with the category itself, like saying you were going to Google something instead of search for it.
Precisely. So if we take this framework of the last mover bridge and we connect it back to the macro strategy for conquering the $3.7 trillion enterprise market, how do they synthesize?
Yeah. How does that work in practice?
Well, one of our founders actually explicitly states this goal in his lecture. He says that when you build for the enterprise today, you do not build to compete head-to-head with a specific suite of incumbent tools.
Okay.
You don't try to build a slightly better version of Microsoft Word. You build platform-agnostic tools to do things the incumbents inherently will not or cannot do.
Give me a concrete example of that. How did Box do it?
Box looked at the landscape. Microsoft wanted you to only use Microsoft products. If you were in their ecosystem, they built walls to keep you there.
Right. The walled gardens.
Apple wanted you only on Apple devices. Oracle wanted you in their databases. They were all building closed silos. Box looked at that and said, we are not going to fight you in the silo. We are going to become the neutral Switzerland of data.
Oh, that's smart.
Very smart. Box deliberately built their software to integrate with everything. They integrated with Microsoft, with Apple, with Google, with Salesforce. Because they were platform agnostic, they became the central nervous system, connecting all the silos.
They became the bridge.
Exactly. They created an ecosystem monopoly. An enterprise couldn't get rid of Box because Box was the only thing allowing their disparate software tools to talk to each other.
There's also this concept of vertical integration, which is called a lost art in Silicon Valley in the sources. Most tech companies try to do one tiny thing and outsource the rest. But the sources point to companies like SpaceX or Tesla.
Right.
Tesla didn't just design a car and outsource the manufacturing to Ford and outsource the software to Microsoft and outsource the dealerships to a franchise. They built the entire stack.
The whole thing.
They built the car, the battery factories, the software operating system, the charging network, and the showrooms. When you vertically integrate a complex system, you create a structure that is so overwhelmingly difficult to replicate that competitors don't even try. You lock in your monopoly.
Okay, so let's lick breath and synthesize where we are.
Yeah.
We have established the arena, the massive, incredibly lucrative enterprise market. And we have established the structural goal, building a monopoly with proprietary tech, network effects, and zero marginal costs. You're building the bridge.
Right.
But here is the critical pivot in our blueprint. You cannot build a massive, complex structural monopoly with a disjointed, chaotic team. As a company scales from 10 people in a garage to 10,000 employees capturing $1 trillion market, the underlying code holding the entire operation together is no longer the software. The underlying code is the culture.
This is such a fascinating transition, moving from external market dynamics to internal DNA.
Uh,
Because, when we hear the word culture in the context of tech startups, we usually roll our eyes.
oh, absolutely.
We think of ping pong tables, kegs in the office, and beanbag chairs. We think of it as a superficial perk. But the titans in our source material treat culture with a deadly, almost clinical seriousness.
They do.
The founder of Airbnb gives an absolute masterclass on this. He approaches culture not as a perk, but as genetic engineering.
He uses a very profound metaphor, actually. He views the founders of a company as parents, and he views the company itself as the child.
Okay.
He states quite bluntly that if the parents, the founders, have a dysfunctional, passive-aggressive, or toxic relationship, the child is going to manifest that exact dysfunction at scale. You cannot hide it.
Wow.
The company will become a messed-up reflection of its creators.
And he puts an unbelievable amount of weight on the first few hires. He says that the first engineer you hire is not just a coder who is going to sit in a corner and ship the next 3 features.
Right.
That person is the foundational DNA for the next 1,000 hires. If you hire someone who is technically brilliant but acts like a toxic jerk, you are not just getting a toxic jerk. You are baking toxicity into the genetic code of your entire engineering department.
Exactly.
Because that first hire will eventually interview and hire the next 10 engineers, and they will hire people who look and act like them.
The brothers who founded the massive payment processor Stripe provide a brilliantly analytical lens on this exact dynamic. They define culture as the mathematical solution to what they call the bandwidth problem.
The bandwidth problem. Walk me through the mechanics of that.
Think about the life cycle of a startup. When you have 5 employees, you, as the founder, can be physically involved in every single decision.
Because you're right there.
Right. You are in the room when the marketing copy is written. You are looking over the shoulder of the engineer writing the code. You are on the phone with the first customer.
Yeah.
The company acts exactly as you want it to act because you are the bottleneck for every action.
Makes sense.
But when you scale to 50 employees or 500 employees or 5,000 employees spread across 4 continents, it becomes mathematically impossible for you to be in the room. Your bandwidth is tapped out.
So how do you ensure that an engineer in Tokyo makes the exact same decision you would make if you were sitting next to them?
That is where culture comes in. They argue that culture is the abstraction of the founder's brains.
Oh, that's good.
It is a highly codified set of shared invariants, values, and operational rules that are downloaded into the mind of every employee. It is a decentralized decision-making framework.
Right.
If the culture is strong, the employee in Tokyo doesn't need to call you to ask what to do. They intuitively know the Stripe way of solving the problem. Culture is the only mechanism that allows an organization to scale without losing its fundamental identity.
One of our sources, a crucial executive at PayPal and LinkedIn, talks about this process of scaling the human element as editing the team. He doesn't view management as cheering people on. He views it as ruthlessly optimizing the talent density, and he divides all employees into 2 distinct categories: barrels and ammunition.
It's a striking analogy. What does he mean by it?
So ammunition refers to people who are highly competent, intelligent, and hardworking, but they need to be aimed.
Right.
If you tell them exactly what to do, they will execute it perfectly. But you give them a blank sheet of paper, they freeze.
Right, they need direction.
Exactly. Barrels, on the other hand, are the rare transformational employees. A barrel is someone who can take a vague, raw idea from inception, figure out the logistical nightmare of how to build it, pull a cross-functional team together, smash through institutional roadblocks, and actually ship the product to the customer.
Wow, okay.
He argues that a company's capacity to do great things is bottlenecked entirely by the number of barrels it has. You can have a mountain of ammunition, but if you don't have enough barrels to fire it, nothing happens. To scale an empire, your cultural operating system must be explicitly designed to identify, hire, and empower barrels.
And part of empowering those barrels is the physical reality of where you locate your company. Another source touches on this deeply with his concept of the infinite learning curve.
What's that?
He points out that building a hypergrowth company is like jumping off a cliff and trying to assemble an airplane on the way down.
Perfect.
Very. The ground is rushing up at you, and you have limited time. You need every single possible advantage just to survive. That is why tech monopolies historically cluster in geographical network hubs like Silicon Valley.
But doesn't the internet make geography irrelevant? Like, why does it matter where the desk is located if everyone is on a laptop?
Because of the ambient knowledge in the network. He specifically notes the trajectory of Groupon. Groupon was a massive hyper-growth company, but its core mechanic was a brute force sales operation.
Right, lots of cold calling.
Yes, it relied on thousands of people making cold calls to local businesses. He argues that Groupon could not have been built in Silicon Valley
Why not?
because the talent pool, the investor mindset, and the ambient culture of Silicon Valley are entirely optimized for capital-efficient, software-based network effects, not massive floors of dialing salespeople.
Oh, that makes sense.
Groupon thrived in Chicago because it tapped into a different kind of labor network. The lesson is that you have to physically move your company to where the network perfectly aligns with the specific problem you are trying to solve. You have to immerse your barrels in an environment that accelerates their learning curve.
This brings us to the actual day-to-day mechanics of maintaining this culture. And the sources in our stack are packed with these hyper-specific, almost obsessive cultural mechanics that founders use to wire their companies together.
They really are.
Let's look at Stripe again. Stripe famously mandated that employees eat 3 meals a day at long communal tables in the office. They deliberately designed the cafeteria to force random human interaction across different departments.
And then you have executives who are openly obsessed with the microscopic details of the office environment. They advocate for buying the absolute most expensive, highest quality laptops for every employee. They advocate for catering high-quality, organic office food.
Right. And when you hear that, it sounds absurd. Then you have Wufoo, a software company from our sources. They instituted these King for a Day hackathons where a random employee gets to dictate the product direction.
Wow.
And to build a unique origin story, they held a programming contest where the grand prize wasn't a cash bonus, it was a custom-forged, historically accurate medieval battle axe.
I have to admit the battle axe is an incredible touch.
It is awesome, but let me push back on this heavily. Let's look at this from the perspective of our listener. You are a startup founder. You are burning cash every day. You are fighting for your life against massive, entrenched incumbents who want to crush you.
Yeah.
Isn't this intense focus on communal tables, organic office food, and forging medieval weaponry just a ridiculous Silicon Valley luxury? Isn't it a distraction? When you were fighting a war, shouldn't you just tell everyone to shut up, sit at their desks, and ship code?
It is the most common criticism of tech culture, and it completely fundamentally misses the point.
How so?
The organic food and the battle axes are not luxuries. They are the ultimate risk mitigation tools. Think back to the bandwidth problem. If you do not have shared invariance, a hyper-growth company will literally rip itself apart from the inside out due to friction.
Right.
Let's take the logic on office food. Why care if the food is good? Because if the food is bad, people start complaining. Complaining creates a culture of negativity. Negativity leads to gossip. Gossip fractures the trust between departments.
It cascades.
Exactly. And when trust fractures, productivity plummets. So paying a premium for good food isn't a perk. It is a highly calculated investment in solving a productivity problem before it even starts. It prevents the friction.
Oh, wow. One of the sources makes this incredibly clear when he talks about the concept of alignment during hypergrowth.
Yes, he points out that when you are a small team, communication happens via osmosis. You all sit in the same room.
Yeah.
But as you scale, if you are hiring 100 new people a year, the communication overhead grows exponentially.
Yeah, you can't just shout across the room anymore.
Exactly. If you do not have a rigid, documented cultural operating system, exactly how we handle HR, exactly how we communicate, exactly what the behavioral expectations are, the system grinds to an agonizing halt.
Makes sense.
The bureaucracy of culture is what prevents the company from collapsing under its own weight. The battle axe wasn't just a quirky prize. It was a deeply intentional artifact designed to build a cult-like loyalty and retention among top-tier engineering talent, which is the scarcest resource in the world.
Okay, so the DNA is set. The founders have acted as responsible parents. They have hired the barrels. They have designed the cultural abstraction to solve the bandwidth problem. The team is aligned.
Right.
But what exactly are they building? How do they ensure this massive, culturally aligned enterprise machine actually solves a human problem and isn't just a shiny, complex piece of useless code?
This brings us to the core mechanics of execution. You can have the best team in the world, but if they're building something no one wants, you die.
Yeah, game over.
And the foundation of building what people want starts with deep, almost uncomfortable user empathy. The founder of the massive live streaming platform Twitch gives a brilliant, counterintuitive framework for conducting user interviews in the sources.
What's his rule?
He has one absolute cardinal rule. Never, ever ask users what features they want.
Wait, hold on. That sounds completely backwards. If your entire goal is to build software for a user, why wouldn't you just ask them what they want you to build?
Because they will lie to you.
They'll lie.
Well, not maliciously, but because human beings are fundamentally terrible at predicting their own future behavior.
Yeah.
Furthermore, in an interview setting, there is a psychological desire to please the person asking the questions.
Oh, sure.
If you show a user a mock-up of a new button and ask, would you use this feature to organize your files?
Hmm?
The user will almost always say, oh yeah, definitely. That looks great. But 6 months later, when you actually build the feature, they will never click it.
So how do you extract the truth if you can't ask them what they want?
He says, you don't ask about the future. You interrogate the present. You ask them to show you their current behavior and their current pain points.
Okay.
He uses the example of comparing two note-taking apps, Evernote and Google Docs. If you ask a user to compare the features theoretically, you get useless data.
Right.
Instead, you say, show me exactly how you took notes in your last meeting. You watch them open the app, you watch where their mouse hesitates, you watch the clumsy workarounds they use to format a bullet point.
Yeah.
You observe what they actually do, not what they say they do. The friction they experience is the truth.
And crucially, he insists that you must always, without exception, record these user interviews on video.
This is a vital internal management tactic. Why record it?
Right.
Because you, the founder, are going to observe this user struggling. You're going to realize the product needs a major overhaul.
Yeah.
And then you are going to walk back into the engineering department and tell a room full of proud developers that their baby is ugly and they need to rewrite the interface.
They're not going to like that.
They will not believe you. They will argue that the user is just stupid. But if you play the video recording of the user actively groaning in frustration as they try to navigate the software, the evidence is undeniable. The video breaks through the engineer's ego.
That's brilliant. Another founder from our sources takes this concept of empathy even further into the realm of radical structural management. He says that if you are building an enterprise software company, you have to treat your relationship with your users like a long-term marriage.
Yeah, he literally cites John Gottman's famous psychological research on marital stability.
He does. He identified a massive broken feedback loop in the modern software engineering structure.
It is the ultimate disconnect. Describe the broken loop.
Okay, so in a standard software company, the developers write the code. They're highly paid, they sit in a quiet room, and they focus on architecture. But they are entirely divorced from the consequences of their code. If a developer writes a clunky, confusing user interface that breaks every time someone tries to export a file, the developer doesn't suffer. The customer support team is the one who suffers.
Yep.
The support team feels the hundreds of angry emails and screaming phone calls. The developer just moves on to the next ticket. The feedback loop is completely severed.
So how did they fix it?
Their solution was radical and frankly terrifying for most engineers. They forced every single engineer to do customer support.
Wow.
Yeah, he references the founder of Kayak, who installed a physical red telephone literally in the middle of the engineering floor. That phone was directly wired to customer support calls.
That is amazing.
Imagine you are an antisocial engineer in the middle of writing a complex algorithm and that red phone rings. You have to answer it. You have to personally deal with a frustrated user who is screaming because your bug just ruined their day.
Ouch.
When an engineer has to personally feel the pain of their own bad code 3 times a day, they stop what they are doing and they fix the bug immediately. It forces empathy through pain. It closes the loop.
It is a brilliant forcing function for quality. Another founder categorizes this under a broader philosophy he calls system thinking.
System thinking.
Yeah. System thinking is the realization that you are never just building a piece of software. You are building an experience at the intersection of hardware, software, and the user's data. You have to resolve the deeper whys of human behavior. Your goal is to build things that people didn't even know they needed. But once they use them, they suddenly cannot imagine living without them.
He uses the Jambox as the perfect example of system thinking. If you rewind to the era before Bluetooth speakers were ubiquitous and you did a focus group and you asked people, do you want to spend $200 on a heavy brick that plays audio from your phone? They would have called you crazy.
Because they already had headphones.
Exactly. They already had headphones. But he looked at the system. The system was all of a user's digital media, their music, their podcasts, were tracked on their phone, but the phone's internal speaker was microscopic and sounded terrible.
Wow.
The friction was the inability to share that media out loud. By solving that specific friction with a beautiful piece of hardware and seamless Bluetooth software, they didn't just build a product, they created an entirely new multi-billion-dollar consumer electronics category.
But getting to that elegant, category-defining solution is rarely a clean process. In fact, the sources emphasize that early on, you have to do things that are incredibly unscalable and messy.
Yeah.
They talk extensively about the necessity of doing things completely manually before you write a single line of code to automate them. You have to be the human algorithm.
Wow, the human
Yeah,
algorithm?
you have to feel the pain of the manual process so intimately that you understand exactly which parts actually need to be automated, rather than wasting months coding an automation for a process that doesn't even matter.
There's this wild story from the founder of Teespring that perfectly encapsulates this scrappy, unscalable mindset. They were early on trying to land a massive enterprise client. This client was the whale that could make or break the company. But the client needed specific, complex, custom features, and they needed them immediately. A traditional engineering mindset would look at that request and say, okay, we need to architect a new scalable database structure, write clean code, QA test it, and we can deploy it in a month.
Which would have cost them the client. The client would have walked away.
Exactly. So what did he do? Instead of writing clean code, he explicitly duplicated their entire live database over a single weekend using what he called duct tape code.
Oh my goodness.
It was a complete architectural nightmare. It was fragile, it was ugly, and it was entirely unscalable. But it worked just well enough to give the client exactly what they asked for by Monday morning.
That is so risky, but so smart.
Right. He optimized entirely for speed and customer capture over technical perfection. He won the client, secured the revenue, learned exactly how the enterprise used the feature, and then, only later, went back and built the proper scalable version.
That story highlights a crucial tension in product development. Engineers naturally want to build complex, feature-rich, technologically elegant systems. But users just want their problems solved simply.
Yeah.
One of the sources brings up the concept of the knowledge gap, which perfectly frames this tension.
Yes, the knowledge gap. Imagine a user looking at your newly designed app. There is a gap between their current baseline knowledge of how software works and the target knowledge required to successfully navigate your specific interface.
Right.
As a product designer, you really only have two choices to close that gap. You can either make the user smarter by forcing them to read a 20-page manual or watch tutorial videos, or you can make the app dumber by stripping away complexity until it is purely intuitive.
And the trap that most enterprise software falls into is trying to make the user smarter. Whenever there's a problem, the engineering team just adds a new feature, a new drop-down menu, a new toggle switch.
Yes.
They think more features equal more value. But every new feature actually widens the knowledge gap. It makes the software more intimidating.
It is exactly like trying to teach a 5-year-old how to ride a bicycle. If the kid is struggling to balance, the engineering mindset says the system lacks control. So they add a complex 10-speed gear shifter. They add a speedometer. They add dual-disc handbrake.
And the kid just falls over.
Right. And they hand the kid a manual on gyroscopic physics. You have just made it exponentially harder to ride the bike. The true product genius looks at the struggling kid and just slaps a pair of cheap plastic training wheels on the back tire. You make the bike dumber. You make it foolproof.
Yeah. If we pull the lens back and connect this philosophy of extreme simplicity and duct tape speed back to that macro strategy for conquering the enterprise, the through line is absolute perfection.
Yeah.
It's explicitly stated that to capture the $3.7 trillion market, you must start intentionally small. You do not walk into a Fortune 500 company on day one and try to sell them a massive $1 million suite that replaces all their core operations.
I will laugh you out of the room.
They will. You have to find a wedge.
Define the wedge in this context for us.
A wedge is a tiny, highly painful, incredibly unsexy, and frequently ignored process within the enterprise. It is a process that the massive incumbents consider too small to bother fixing.
Okay.
Think about Zen Payroll, which focused entirely on the excruciatingly boring process of managing small business payroll taxes. You find that wedge. You apply the user empathy we just talked about. You apply the extreme simplicity of the training wheels.
Right.
You build a product that solves that one tiny problem so perfectly and elegantly that the employees adopt it immediately. And once you have established a beachhead inside the enterprise ecosystem, once you have their trust and their data, you slowly expand outward, absorbing more and more workflows until you become the structural monopoly we talked about earlier.
Okay. So let's trace the arc here. You recognized the enterprise market, you adopted the monopoly mindset, you wired the internal DNA with culture, you found your wedge, you duct taped the early product, and you achieved massive initial traction. The users love you. But this is where the story gets dark for a lot of founders. Evolving from a scrappy, fast-moving startup into an enduring trillion-dollar enterprise powerhouse requires crossing a terrifying threshold. The founders have to stop being hackers.
Right.
They have to start making agonizing, rigid, grown-up management and structural decisions.
This is the crucible of scaling. This is where companies either become empires or they implode into bureaucratic chaos. And one of our sources, a legendary operator and investor in Silicon Valley, delivers an absolute masterclass on the cold, hard mechanics of management at scale.
He really does.
He introduces a cardinal rule of management decision-making that he names after the Sly and the Family Stone song, "Sometimes I'm Right."
It's a great framing. What is the core concept?
The concept is about perspective. When you are the CEO and you are faced with a critical, painful personnel or operational decision, your natural instinct is to view the problem from your own perspective. Or at best, you view it from the perspective of the person sitting across the desk from you.
Which feels natural.
It does, but he argues that this is a catastrophic failure of leadership. To manage at scale, you must force yourself to see every single decision through the eyes of the entire company. You must view it through the eyes of the employees who are not in the room.
He gives a brutal real-world example to illustrate this, and it is the exact scenario that tears startups apart. Imagine you have an executive. Let's call him the VP of sales.
Okay.
He was one of your first hires. He is incredibly hardworking. He is the first one in the office and the last one to leave. Everyone in the company loves him personally, but the company has grown from 10 million in revenue to 100 million, and he is simply in over his head. He lacks the sophisticated skills required to manage a global sales organization. He is failing.
So the founder is faced with a dilemma.
Right.
The founder loves this guy. The founder wants to be compassionate. So the founder thinks, I don't want to fire him. That's too harsh. I'll just demote him. I will hire a new, experienced chief revenue officer to be his boss, and he can stay on the team in a lesser role.
Yeah, to the founder, this feels like a brilliant win-win. You solve the competence problem without having to fire your friend.
But then the perspective completely flips. He asks the founder one simple question. What is that failing executive's equity compensation? Because he was an early hire, it turns out the guy owns 1.5% of the entire company. That is a massive chunk of equity.
Oh, man.
Right.
Yeah.
And now he says, look at this decision through the eyes of your brilliant world-class engineering team. These engineers joined later. They are building the actual product that is saving the company. But they only own 0.1% of the company.
Oh, I see it.
How do they feel coming to work every day, taking orders from demoted, failing executive who clearly cannot do his job, but who owns 15 times more of the company than they do?
It completely destroys the meritocracy. When you view it through the eyes of the engineers who are actually doing the work, the compassionate decision to demote him is actually deeply toxic to the culture.
Completely toxic.
The only correct, responsible decision for the health of the entire organism is to fire the executive. It is harsh, but it is necessary.
And that harsh reality extends to every facet of scaling. Another source talks about the harsh realities of quantitative scaling. When people hear growth hacking, they think of cheap, viral marketing tricks.
Right.
But he emphasizes that growth is fundamentally an infrastructure problem. He says that growth is entirely meaningless if you do not have retention first.
Ah.
If your product is a leaky bucket, it does not matter how much marketing water you pour into the top, you will never fill the bucket. You have to fix the core product loop first.
And once the bucket is sealed, how do you scale it globally?
That is where the deep structural engineering comes in. He talks about internationalization. When a massive platform like Facebook decided to expand globally, they didn't just hire a bunch of translators to manually rewrite the website into French and Spanish. Very early on, their engineers went deep into the code base and wrapped every single text string on the website in automated translation scripts.
Wait, explain what a translation script is for the listener who doesn't code. How does that work mechanically?
Think of the code behind a button that says log in. In a normal website, the programmer just types the English words log in directly into the code.
Okay.
But if you want to launch in Germany, someone has to manually go find that code and change it to German. Their engineers built an infrastructure where the button code didn't contain an English word. Instead, it contained an empty box, a variable.
Oh, that's smart.
And when a user opened the site instantly checked the user's location, recognized they were in Germany, pulled the German translation from a central database, and injected it into the empty box.
Wow.
By wrapping the entire site in this infrastructure early on, they didn't have to rebuild the site for every new country.
Mm.
When they were ready to go global, they literally just flipped a switch, and the platform scaled to dozens of languages instantly.
That is the difference between a product and an empire right there. It is the unseen bedrock. And speaking of bedrock, we have to talk about the legal and financial structures,
Oh.
because two brilliant legal and financial minds from our sources deliver what might be the most terrifying lecture in the entire stack. They warn founders about the mundane, administrative, grown-up stuff that can literally assassinate a company before it even gets off the ground.
It is the ultimate tragedy to build a brilliant product and then lose the company because of a paperwork error.
Totally.
They hammer on several key points.
Mm.
First is equity vesting. Never, ever give a co-founder their entire chunk of the company on day one. Use a vesting schedule.
What does that mean exactly?
This means they earn their shares slowly over 4 years. Why? Because if you give your co-founder 50% of the company on day one and they decide to quit a month later, they walk away owning half of your life's work and the company is instantly unfundable.
Man, that's scary. And then they bring up the 83B election, which sounds like incredibly boring tax code, but is actually a ticking time bomb for founders. Break down exactly what happens if a founder forgets to file an 83B election. Why is this so critical?
This is a classic devastating trap. When you start a company, your shares are worth practically nothing. Let's say a fraction of a penny. Over the next 4 years, as you vest those shares, the company might grow and become highly valuable.
Right, hopefully.
Maybe your shares are now worth $1 million. The IRS looks at that and says, congratulations, you just earned $1 million in income. You owe us hundreds of thousands of dollars in taxes this year.
But the founder hasn't sold the shares. They don't actually have the cash. It's just paper wealth.
Exactly. It's phantom income. The founder is hit with a massive tax bill they cannot possibly pay, which forces them to sell their shares just to pay the IRS, essentially ruining their ownership in their own company.
Oh, wow.
The 83B election is a simple one-page form you send to the IRS within 30 days of starting the company. It essentially says, I want to pay taxes on my shares right now, today, when they are worth nothing. You pay a few cents in tax up front, and it completely legally shields you from the massive tax bomb later. But if you miss that strict 30-day window, there is no appeal. You are trapped.
That is brutal. They also give a chilling warning about payroll taxes. They explicitly state that under no circumstances can a founder ignore payroll taxes.
Never.
If you are running out of money, you can delay paying your server bills. You can delay paying your rent. But if you withhold taxes from your employees' paychecks and use that money to fund the business instead of sending it to the government, the corporate veil is pierced. As they point out, ignoring payroll taxes isn't just a civil fine. Founders go to federal prison for that.
Yeah, the government views it as stealing directly from the Treasury.
So serious.
These are the structural realities that separate the amateurs from the professionals. And another source brings up another massive structural financial debate regarding employee equity, specifically the standard 90-day option exercise window.
This is a huge issue for retention and fairness. Explain the mechanics of the 90-day window.
In Silicon Valley, standard employee contracts dictate that if you leave a company, whether you quit or are fired, you have exactly 90 days to buy or exercise your vested stock options. But here's the problem. If the company has been wildly successful, the value of those shares has skyrocketed. The tax bill required to exercise those options might be hundreds of thousands or even millions of dollars.
Yeah, and most normal employees do not have $1 million sitting in their bank account.
Exactly. So what happens? The 90 days expire, and the employee loses the equity they worked years to earn. It returns to the company.
That's awful.
It is. It effectively traps employees. They want to leave, they're burned out, but they can't afford to exercise their options, so they stay, becoming bitter and toxic.
But one founder implemented a radical solution to this. He created a 10-year exercise window.
Which changes everything.
It does. He essentially said, if you help build this company, your equity is yours. Even if you leave, you have a decade to figure out how to pay the taxes, or wait until the company goes public and sell some shares to cover it. Extending that window is a massive, complex structural decision. It dilutes the founders slightly, but it fundamentally alters the fairness and trust within the company culture. It treats employees like true owners.
And that deep respect for structural fairness ties perfectly back into that final, perhaps most counterintuitive piece of advice regarding compensation we heard earlier.
Oh, about raises.
Right. In a scrappy early startup, compensation is usually handled ad hoc. An employee walks into the CEO's office, says they got a better offer from Google, and demands a raise. The CEO, panicking about losing talent, agrees on the spot.
I mean, it seems pragmatic. You save the employee.
But it's argued that doing this is a cultural disaster. By giving an ad hoc raise to the person who complained the loudest, you are sending a deeply toxic message to the entire organization.
Oh, I see.
You are training your employees that the only way to advance in the company is to constantly threaten to leave. You are training them that they have a fiduciary duty to themselves to constantly badger management for more money.
And the hidden collateral damage is what happens to the quiet employees.
Exactly. You're actively punishing the brilliant, dedicated, introverted engineers who just put their heads down and do incredible work, but who aren't aggressive political negotiators. As you scale, founders must implement formal, rigid, periodic processes for evaluating performance and granting raises. No exceptions, no off-cycle bumps just because someone complained.
But hold on a second. I am listening to this and I am hearing demands for rigid, formal performance reviews. I am hearing advice to write down strict HR rulebooks, complex vesting schedules, and tax compliance. Doesn't introducing all of this corporate bureaucracy completely kill the magic? Doesn't it destroy the startup vibe, the agility, and the fast-moving chaos that made the company successful and innovative in the first place?
It is the ultimate paradox of scale. It feels like bureaucracy kills culture. But the reality is that process is the only thing that protects the culture.
Really?
Think about it. Without formal structures, a scaled company of 1,000 people rapidly degenerates into a hyper-political nightmare. If there are no rules for compensation, decisions are driven by whoever is best at playing office politics, or whoever plays golf with the CEO on weekends. The meritocracy dies.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense.
Bureaucracy, when designed intelligently, is an exoskeleton. It protects fairness. It ensures that the quiet, brilliant engineer is rewarded equally with the loud, charismatic salesperson.
And from an external perspective, the investors in our sources point out that at the late stage, investors actually demand this maturity. By the time you are scaling a true enterprise company, picking your late stage investors is like entering a marriage.
It's a huge commitment.
It's a 10 to 20-year journey. Investors writing $100 million checks at that stage are not looking for a flashy prototype, a cool vibe, or a chaotic genius. They are looking for absolute, boring, predictable, operational excellence. They are looking for founders who have successfully transitioned from building a product to building a machine that builds the product.
That is the perfect encapsulation. You are no longer building the water, you are building the municipal utility company that manages the water.
So let's step back and look at the massive blueprint we have just decoded. Let's recap this incredible journey for you listening. We started by shattering the consumer illusion and identifying the massive hidden structural power of the $3.7 trillion enterprise market.
Right.
We learn that the goal is not to compete in a bloody race to the bottom, but to build structural monopolies utilizing proprietary tech, zero marginal costs, and platform-agnostic network effects.
We then explored how to wire the internal DNA of that monopoly. We learned that founders are parents, the first engineer is the genetic code, and culture is the vital mathematical abstraction required to solve the communication bandwidth problem.
We saw how to execute that vision by relying on deep, uncomfortable user empathy-forcing engineers to answer the red telephone of customer support. We embraced the necessity of extreme simplicity, using training wheels to close the knowledge gap, and utilizing duct tape speed to find that initial unsexy wedge inside the enterprise fortress.
And finally, we unpacked the crucible of scaling, the agonizing transition into maturity where founders must adopt that sometimes I'm right perspective, establish rigid processes to protect meritocracy, and navigate the lethal legal bedrock of vesting schedules and tax law to sustain a sprawling empire without it collapsing into political chaos.
It is an absolute masterclass in building giants. It is the operating manual for the modern economy. But as we reach the end of this deep dive, if we want to look forward, if we want to understand where the enterprise is going tomorrow, we have to build on that concept of the last mover and those technological shifts we talked about earlier.
Right, because the last massive shift was the consumerization of IT user-led cloud adoption driven by the mobile phone. But the tectonic plates are shifting again right now.
They really are.
And this raises the ultimate provocative question for anyone listening who wants to build the next monopoly. What happens to the $3.7 trillion enterprise software market when artificial intelligence completely hollows out the entire middle management layer of the global workforce?
Man, That is a thought. I mean, it was famously said over a decade ago that software is eating the world, but we are entering an era where AI is about to eat the software.
Yes.
Think about the fundamental premise of enterprise software today. It is built to help human beings organize, track, and execute their work. It is a dashboard for human labor. But if we deploy AI agents that can simply do the work autonomously, if the AI can read the email, negotiate the logistics, update the database, and route the shipment without human intervention, the interface fundamentally changes.
The human doesn't need a dashboard anymore.
Exactly. It completely flips the paradigm. The next last mover monopoly in the enterprise space might not be a software company in the traditional sense. It might be an enterprise agency company. A company that doesn't sell you a subscription to a sleek project management tool, but simply sells you the digital worker that executes the project in the background. It implies that today's massive enterprise software monopolies, the very empires we just learned how to build, could soon find themselves suffering from the exact same innovator's dilemma that paralyzed the old legacy giants 20 years ago.
Trapped by their own highly profitable dashboards.
Yes, unable to pivot to invisible agentic AI without destroying their current revenue.
That is a staggering thought. The conquerors eventually become the incumbents, ripe for disruption by the next generation finding a new wedge.
It always comes full circle. So as we close out, I want you to remember the metaphor we started with. The consumer world will always have its trendy, flashy pop-up shops. They are loud, they are fun, and they fade away. But true, enduring power lies in the infrastructure. It lies in being the municipal water supply. Your challenge now is to look at the shifting landscape and figure out what the next water supply looks like. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the structures around you, keep looking for the wedge, and we will see you next time.